Alright, so welcome. So today I'm going to be going over DSLR video settings in your camera. So the first thing I'd like to note is my camera is in video mode, not photography mode. Some of these settings on a Canon 5D Mark III aren't available in the shooting mode, so make sure you are in video mode. So I'm going to go ahead and hit menu, and we're going to bring up the first one that we want to see, which is this movie record size. And I'm going to go ahead and select that. And what you're going to see is a whole bunch of different stuff. So first off, you're going to see this all I and IPB, and those are both compression. All I is going to give you better quality video, but at a much larger size. IPB is going to compress your video, not quite as high of quality. So that's the difference. So I'm shooting in all I. The next one you see on this setting here is I'm shooting at 1920 at 30 frames per second. So that's my image quality. So it's 1920 by 1080 at 30 frames per second. And that's pretty much what I shoot video at. So the other option would be to shoot at 24 frames per second. So if we go down here, we can see this is 24 frames per second. And the difference there is you get not quite as smooth a video, but you get more of a cinematic effect. So you'll see people who are looking for more of a cinematic effect to switch to 24 frames per second. Now, some of the newer cameras are going to be shooting at 1920 by 60 frames per second. So at 60 frames per second, you're going to have smoother video. So as you pan or as you move your video, those motions are going to be smoother than at 30 frames per second. And YouTube and stuff like that does support 60 frames per second. So you can see at mine is an older camera, and if I want to shoot 60 frames per second, the highest resolution I can go is 1280. So presently though, I just use this 1920 by 30 frames per second. Now you'll see European cameras do shoot at a different frame rate. Their normal frame rate is about 25 frames per second versus what we use here in the US. So, but since I have a US camera, we're not going to bother with that. So if you are interested in shooting slow motion, you're going to want to probably shoot up around 120 frames per second. Now, obviously, my DSLR does not go that high, and it's a little bit older. But the higher your frames per second, the better your high speed or your slow motion is going to be as far as video being smooth. Now, the next thing you're going to need to know is, so we're shooting at 30 frames per second on this. And let me bring that back up here. All right, so we got that back up. So if you're shooting whatever frames per second, so it's 30 in this case, you want to set your shutter speed about double that. So if you're shooting 30 frames per second, you're going to want to have your camera's shutter speed at 60 frames per second. If you are at 60 frames per second, you want your shutter speed to be at 120 frames per second. So it's basically double what your frames per second is set at. All right, so the next thing that we're going to go into here is I'm just going to go ahead and hit this menu. So I've got sound recording, and I've got sound recording set to auto. And so what this is doing is it's giving me auto levels. So it's automatically, as I talk, setting the levels that comes from my voice or any audio that it's picking up automatically. The other way to do that is to switch down to manual, and then under manual you can see now my levels are lower. I'm trying to basically have my max levels at that 12 dB right there that you see. So right now it's a little bit low, but if I talk really loud, you can see that it does go up past that 12 dB. So I would basically manually adjust this one way or another to either raise or lower my volume, so what it's recording. Now, I'm not actually recording my audio in with this on-camera mic because it's horrible. So I'm using a separate Zoom microphone to record the audio. So that's how you record your audio. And basically, even if you do plug in an external, like a shotgun mic, you can still use auto, or you can do the manual version of setting your different stuff there. So we'll go out of that. So the last thing you should know is when shooting video on a DSLR, note that you only have about 20 minutes before it will automatically shut off. So a lot of cameras that are DSLRs, not video cameras, automatically shut off around 20 minutes or 30 minutes, somewhere around there, depending on the camera. So don't just press the button and leave, because it will shut off after a while. So all you have to do is hit to start again and it will start recording again. But it does have that issue. So if you ever plan on recording something longer than 20 minutes, make sure you're around to hit start again, because it's going to shut itself off. So the last and probably the most important thing here is when you're shooting video, let's see if I can just get my white balance up here. So you can see we have all these different white balance modes. Now, typically as a photographer, I actually just use auto white balance because I shoot everything in RAW, so I can come back in later and change that. When shooting video, you definitely do not want to use auto white balance, because you want your white balance to be consistent. So whether you do a custom white balance or you slide over here and pick a preset balance, these are okay. You just don't want to use the auto white balance because your color might change as you shoot. The last thing I'm going to go over is picture style. So we're going to go back here to picture style. Now, for a photo, these picture styles are great. But the problem is they have way too much contrast. They're not flat enough to shoot video. When shooting video, you want to shoot with a wider dynamic contrast, meaning you don't want as much contrast as in a normal photo. So what I have is either I will manually dial this in, so I'll lower the contrast, or in this case I've actually uploaded a couple of different things. So you can see here I've got CineStyle, I think that's my Technicolor, then this Marvels. And so what that does is shoot a flatter, less vibrant type of an image. However, I can come in here and I will go with just this neutral. Now you can see I have a -3 and a -4. Whenever it shows up in blue like that, it means that I've manually gone in there and changed it. So we'll select that. Whoops. I think I gotta hit info. And so you can see here my saturation. There's my contrast. I've lowered that all the way down. I can select that and move it up a little. So usually around there, around that 1 on this Canon works pretty good. Let's see, menu to go back, and saturation. Now you don't need to desaturate your images. It helps if you're going to be doing some sort of color grading or something like that. And the other thing that lowering your contrast does, helps you get more like detail in shadow and highlight areas when you're shooting video. It allows you just to basically go in there and color correct and do more stuff. So I'm going to leave mine there and we're good. So color tone, I'm not going to change the color of that or the sharpness. I could definitely go back up, hit sharpness, and bring that up a bit if I wanted. It's something you need to kind of go through on your camera and your lenses and test out to see what you like. You can always add sharpness in video editing as well. So those are the basic settings for shooting video. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave those below, and don't forget to subscribe.